Good morning and welcome to our webinar on Microsoft 365 and in particular leveraging the security and compliance elements of the license stack. Just to go over a few things before we begin. We are Cloud Direct. I'm just going to introduce you to a bit of our company if you haven't dealt with us before. We help our customers make their fearless growth ambitions a reality. So just a little bit about ourselves. We have offices in Bath and London in the UK, and we have an office down in Cape Town in South Africa, where we house our managed service centre of excellence. We've got multinational technical and commercial services and around 20 years experience in the sector as operating as Cloud Direct. Specialising in large-scale cloud transformations, but also some of the smaller projects as well. We are Microsoft first and only, so we work exclusively within the Microsoft technology stack. We don't go for kind of multi-cloud specialisms, and we have the kind of highest levels of accreditations with Microsoft, working very closely with them. Templated solutions due to our years of experience of similar projects. And we like to think that we work agile and fast to the customer's requirements. So just to show a little more about us and how we operate, we have kind of three main areas in what we like to do. So firstly, we like to build it right. We like to go with best practice solutions. We like to de-risk and accelerate delivery using our expertise, our experience, and configuration standards that we can use as a baseline and then tailor to business contexts. And we've developed our own internal framework around modern work, which is aligned to Microsoft's cloud adoption framework, which is more infrastructure centric. But we like to think that cloud adoption works across the stack, and we can use these things regardless of what we're working with. So we're trying to adapt and make sure that we're using the best of those worlds. We have a teach, don't sell mantra, which runs straight through our organisation from the very top right through to our managed services offerings. And this is about making sure that we are transferring knowledge to customers. These webinars are a good example of that. We're not looking to kind of keep knowledge in-house. We're looking to pass that on. We're looking to help people utilise the tool sets and do the best things for themselves. We like to co-design and deploy best practice solutions. We like to work alongside our partners and our customers to make sure that everybody is getting the full benefit of that experience, that expertise, and getting the best deployment they can do within the context of their own business. And we can even help people define and build their own cloud centre of excellence so that they've got that internal knowledge transfer as well, and they aren't building dependencies on external organisations. And we operate with what we call the learning edge. So we were the first partner to roll out E5s within the UK. We are the #1 UK partner for solution assessments. With Microsoft, we like to use and align to Microsoft programs for funding where possible. And we've got a proven track record of successful delivery. In terms of those accreditations, we are a Microsoft Azure Expert MSP, of which there aren't that many of them globally, and even fewer in the UK, which puts us right at the top of the partnership levels with Microsoft. We have our solutions partner designations across pretty much every available specialism that we can, apart from Dynamics 365, where we don't really play. We don't have a practice for Dynamics, but across everything else, we kind of sit at the top table in terms of designations. And we've got advanced specializations as well across multiple areas of the Microsoft stack. In 2022, we were the Partner of the Year finalist, so the only UK finalist in the Solution Assessments Awards for Microsoft Partner of the Year. And we've got accreditations with kind of complementary technologies that we work with in terms of deliveries across the Azure stack, in terms of some of those virtual machines and technologies that we're utilising in that space. And kind of ISO accreditations, working quite closely with organisations on those as well from a security compliance perspective. In terms of myself, my name is Pete Murphy. I am the practice lead for Modern Workplace here at Cloud Direct. So pretty much anything that sits within the Microsoft 365 stack sits within my team in my area of the business. So that's why I'm kind of well situated to pulled together the content for this webinar this morning. Happy to answer any questions that people have afterwards, any follow-ups that you've got, and any kind of examples of where we may have utilised these technologies previously. In terms of today's agenda, we have kind of four main elements. Firstly, understanding the product capabilities across the modern work stack across Microsoft 365. Secondly, is about how you can look kind of internally within the business at requirements, priorities, and understanding where you want to focus some attention. Thirdly, then making the most of your existing investment, and then looking at how you can plan for the future as well. So we'll dive straight in and try and get through this content as quickly as we can and give you some time back. But as I say, any questions, please do let us know. The way we operate here at Cloud Direct is across what we call the 5 pillars of modern work. So what we're trying to do with these pillars, and this is where I'll kind of centre the functionality part of this webinar, is that the concept of modern work, the license of Microsoft 365, it contains a lot of different products, it contains a lot of technologies, and those can be implemented differently across different industries. But what we like to think is that there are 5 core pillars regardless of the implementation stack. So we're looking at identity, device, data, communication and collaboration, and applications. Now, when people come to us and say that they want to look at moving files off a file server, we're instantly into kind of our data pillar and looking at the right solution within that data. But on top of that, we're then looking at how people are working with that data in communication and collaboration. We're looking at how people access that data, and that can cross identity, device, applications. That solution can very quickly span multiple parts of these pillars. And you may notice that we don't have security and compliance called out explicitly in one of these pillars because it spans across all 5 of these areas. It's integral to everything that we look at and everything that we do. So we don't believe that there is a single solution, but we want to look at business objectives as a whole and make sure that when we are talking about modern work, when we are talking about how things operate, we are giving people the best of the tool sets that they've got available rather than honing in on a single solution. So if I go through these pillars in a bit more detail in terms of what they mean in real terms and what's available from a security compliance perspective, hopefully that will start to make a bit more sense. So in terms of identity, we know that security is kind of at the heart of everything we do at the moment, and it's a very important part of the IT infrastructure and ecosystem at the moment. So what we're looking at from an identity perspective is making sure that we are trying to utilize as far as possible a trusted identity model. To us, that sits within Azure AD or Entra ID, depending on how you've kind of evolved your terminology set in line with Microsoft's rebrands. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to consolidate identity into a single model. So people have got one set of credentials, they've got a protected set of credentials, and they can use those to access as many of our services as possible. So what we're looking at here is how we can securely interact with as many systems as possible. We are aware that people might need to use third-party systems, partner infrastructure. How can we utilize those credentials, those secure aspects that we've pulled together in order to make that easier? We're then looking at how we can identify and remediate risks to services as part of that. We're also looking at managing access to solutions based on environmental factors. So where are people accessing this from? When was the last time that they accessed it, and where was that from? Is there any red flags that are being thrown by those metrics, by those auditable capabilities that we've got that show us this identity or this access is potentially unsafe? And then on top of that, we're also looking to utilize the principle of least privilege and not give people access to things that they don't need access to. Making sure that we can verify people's responses, we can make sure that people aren't sitting with the keys to the kingdom if they don't need that to carry out the jobs that they're trying to do. So in terms of identity protection and how we can utilize some of the tools within Microsoft 365 to get us to a place where that's reasonable. We've got things in the stack such as single sign-on, utilizing that Entra ID to get into other systems, to get into third-party elements if we need to, and to manage that identity. Once we've got to the point where we're using that identity as our primary method of authentication, We are hoping that everybody is using some form of multi-factor authentication and conditional access, so that that is all protected, so that when somebody tries to log into the system, we can explicitly verify who they are. We can make sure we know exactly what's going on, and verify that we are the person accessing it is who they say they are. We can use things like risky sign-in logs and user sign-in risks just to understand where somebody potentially has accessed it that we're not 100% sure, so that we can take action based on that. So if somebody logs in from the UK 1 minute and then from South Africa an hour later, we know that that's probably not likely to be the same person logging in. So we can put extra controls around that and just make sure that people are who they say they are, and that the accounts are being utilised effectively and properly as we'd expect them to be. We can use privileged identity management, and this goes back to the principle of least privilege, making sure that people aren't sat with administrator roles when they don't need to do administrator tasks, making sure that we've got the right roles in place so that people can elevate themselves to have the right roles at the right time. And all of that can be compliant with Cyber Essentials Plus as well. So we can have privileged identity management set on a separate account to the main account if those are the kind of things that we need to do. We can also look at Defender for Identity, predominantly in hybrid situations, but making sure that the signals we're getting from Active Directory match up with those in the cloud, and making sure that people are protected no matter what they are trying to do from any malicious attacks on their identity. When we look at devices, what we're trying to ensure is that we can manage devices from a cloud platform in an ideal scenario. We know this isn't always the case, and sometimes there are hybrid factors, there are on-premise legacy factors to management, but what we want to do is just make sure that we've got control over those devices and the benefits of cloud are being utilised where possible. This enables users to have secure managed endpoints. It means that we can monitor what's going on with those, we can ensure that they are getting updates, and we can make sure that the configuration that we want them to have, restrictions that we want to put on those devices are taking place. Within Microsoft 365, we've got device protection included. So we've got things like Defender for Endpoint, which will be on the next slide. Let's make sure we're utilising that. If we've got third-party protection systems, let's make sure we're deploying that effectively and we can monitor how that's happening. As we've already mentioned, ensure devices and applications are receiving updates wherever they may be. Rather than relying on things like VPN and update servers and making sure that people have to connect back to the corporate network to deploy those updates. The pace of change is so rapid now that it makes sense to let Microsoft handle those updates in a lot of cases and just push those directly to devices, so that no matter where a user may be, they can get those updates in a relatively short time frame, and we can take care of those emerging threats as they're coming through. We can also use device management to look at things like BYOD, monitor the usage of personal devices, making sure that corporate resources are being protected no matter how people are accessing them and what devices they're coming from. In an increasingly flexible workplace with hybrid work, there are an increasing number of people that are looking to access things off their personal devices rather than carry two phones, or even use their own laptops for certain things. So making sure that those elements are covered, making sure that those are secure and not seen as a risk to the organisation, or they're a manageable risk where those things are in place, it is important. And then reviewing and implementing scalable solutions for virtual endpoints. So we've got multiple options on the table for virtual endpoints. We're looking at things like Azure Virtual Desktop. We're looking at things like Windows 365, but making sure the access to those is secure, making sure that where people are migrating from data centers and legacy RDS solutions, we're finding the right solution for them moving forward and not just trying to lift and shift with those migrations. In terms of device protection, obviously we've got a few bits within Intune which we can utilize for that, for getting those devices enrolled. That also includes kind of SCCM configuration manager, and making sure that those technologies are playing well together. We're looking at utilizing Defender for Endpoint. That's included in the majority of Microsoft 365 licenses now, which contains endpoint management. So making sure we're using those Defender suites, making sure we're utilizing those technologies, getting the benefit of the trillions of signals that Microsoft are receiving to get a quick response to threats is important. The Intune suite, which was announced in March of this year, gives us some extra functionality around application deployment, around support for those devices, and around AI-driven advanced analytics so that we can get ahead of problems within the estate and understand exactly what's going on, and start to automate some of the remediation to that as well. Update rings and auto patch are a very important part of what we're trying to do to protect devices within the security and compliance suite, making sure that those deployments are getting out to the devices, making sure we can monitor who hasn't updated within a specified timescale, and just making sure that we're keeping everything up to date to circumvent any kind of 0-hour threats that we might be wanting to get to. And again, taking a look at our configuration and compliance profiles and how we can utilize those within other parts of the stack as well. So making sure that our configuration restrictions are applying to those devices, but also making sure that if things aren't compliant, if devices do tend to throw up a flag that they may be a risky device, that we're taking action, we're challenging those authentication points, and we're making sure that people are accessing from a compliant device and we're not introducing risk into the estate. In terms of our data pillar, we're looking to understand operational usage of data and resources and how people can utilize cloud to work better. So we're looking at flexible working patterns. We're looking at how we can allow people to access data from anywhere, but without introducing risk to the organization from data egress. We're also looking at retention and how we can make sure data is being held subject to a number of requirements. They could be legal, they could be insurance purposes, there could be a corporate responsibility to hold data, there could just be a corporate requirement for things like HR data to be held for a certain amount of time, and making sure that we've got tools in place to do that and to remove the risk of accidental deletion. We're also looking at how we can protect sensitive content within our estate, with markings, with encryption, with whatever that looks like, ensuring that the right people get access to the right things, but the wrong people don't, and that data is held in the most convenient way. So we're looking at ultimately enabling the flexibility of cloud usage, but without hindering and compromising on security. When we start to talk about data protection in a bit more detail, we're looking at things like data loss prevention. We're looking at making sure that we can automate some of those detection and response theories, where if we see a large amount of personally identifiable data or financial data, that we can put a block on that if there's a large amount of it leaving the organization, or we can put some approvals in play. We're looking at sensitivity and retention labels, understanding exactly what is sensitive, what needs to be labeled, what needs to be kept, and how we need to protect that data. And there's a really large piece of work that can go into that within some organizations. We're looking at backup and archive. What is the need for data to be backed up? What are we backing up to protect ourselves from? And what is the justification for that? There absolutely is justification for backups and archives, managing those pieces of data, make sure they're being stored in the most appropriate way, and protecting ourselves from risk from just having data lying around in potentially the wrong places. We're looking at e-discovery. We're looking at how to identify data within the estate. If somebody comes in with a subject access request, how do we find everything that we're holding? And how do we make sure that we're not holding things we shouldn't be? So there are cases for e-discovery within the Microsoft Purview toolset. Insider risk management. So our people are our greatest asset, and they do a lot of good things for organizations everywhere. However, disgruntled employees or just people that are doing things accidentally can be also a risk to us, people that are leaving the organization. So insider risk management allows us to cater for that and to take steps to avoid that. So what we're doing with insider risk management, we can potentially link our Microsoft environment to our HR system, so we know if somebody's serving a notice period, it can start to look at people's behavioural concepts, and if people suddenly start to move a large amount of sensitive data, that can be flagged and highlighted. So there are key parts within that insider risk management which can protect you and your data. And then there are information barriers which can also be in play. So if you've got parts of an organisation that absolutely don't need to see another part of the organization's data, we can put a physical barrier in place to stop that, which is a level above just permissions management and making sure people don't have access to certain things, which can be circumvented by sharing. But we can make sure that those information barriers put a physical hard stop between those elements. When we're looking at the next pillar in terms of communication and collaboration, We're looking at how people communicate internally. So we're looking at messaging, we're looking at how people talk to each other. We're trying to improve employee engagement in an ever more remote and hybrid world, where people have got the capability to work from anywhere, from customer sites, from different offices, even from home quite a lot of the time now. We're looking at making sure that people still feel part of an organization, people are still engaged with what's happening. We're also trying to modernize telephony in light of the ISDN switch off in a couple of years' time. We're trying to make sure that things like telephony, external communications, and how people work with each other is modern and is accessible, and is using all of the benefits of kind of home broadband that we've got as well. We're trying to keep users informed, whether that be via an intranet, whether that be a corporate communications team, however that is. We're trying to make sure that people are engaged, are responding, and are getting the information they need to do their job. We're trying to make sure that corporate material is accessible, so making sure that people know where things live, how to get to them, and that they can get them in a way that kind of meets with their flow of work. And make sure that we're enabling collaborative work, and make sure we're putting in things such as co-authoring, version history, making sure we're taking the usage of the tools. From a communication and collaboration perspective, from security and compliance, we're looking at things like Defender for Office 365. So if we're enabling outward communication, we're allowing people to have things like emails. We're trying to make sure that those aren't introducing additional threats to us. So Defender for Office 365, which covers things like safe links and safe attachments, anti-malware, anti-phishing, and allows us to do those kind of protection inbuilt within the tool set, and again, making the benefits or getting the most out of the signals that Microsoft are receiving across the multiple billions of messages that are going their way every day. We've got data loss prevention again. So when those things are leaving the organization, whether that be via sharing in Teams or SharePoint, whether that be via email, or however that is whatever that point of egress is, we're making sure that the sensitive data isn't leaving. We're looking to manage external and guest access. We're looking to make sure that the people coming into our organization have been invited, and we're not just throwing the doors open and allowing them to come in. And there are a couple of ways that we can make sure that we're maximizing the effectiveness of our external users and our policies around allowing them access into our data. Things like domain restrictions, whether we're going to allow a subset of domains to interact with our organization, whether we're going to deny certain domains, which coming soon, there is also a policy where we can deny top level domains. So if we wanted to deny access to any account that ended in .ru, given current world events, then that will be absolutely possible, and we can make sure that we're protecting ourselves where possible from those elements of cybercrime. And then we're also looking at account and group expiry. So where we have got guest accounts, we don't want that to be a one-time invite and then leave the doors open for the rest of time. If those people aren't using the access that we've given them, why shouldn't we shut that down? Why shouldn't we remove their accounts as guests from our directory? And if they do need access to anything that we've got, they can request that again in future. So we're just making sure that we are taking reasonable steps to allow collaboration, but without leaving risk open for ourselves. And then in terms of applications, we're looking to understand our own investments, optimizing our costs. So where have we got tools in use within the organization that are potentially duplicating functionality or creating a risk for us? We're looking to gain insight into the usage of tools. So where are people looking to use tools in those areas? Where can we potentially have siloed solutions that have been deployed outside of standard governance, which again are causing duplication of functionality? And what are the risk vectors within our estate from the applications that we're choosing to deploy? We're also looking at how we can modernize, move away from data centers and hosted solutions, move to software as a service, and how that can be achieved in the most efficient and straightforward way with as little risk to the organization as possible. And then where possible, where can we expedite processes with in-house low, no-code solutions? Where can we enable people to make their processes quicker, automate things that they're having to do repetitively, and just give them the tool set in order to make their life a bit easier? And when we look at application protection, we're kind of looking within the tool set at some main functionality. So Defender for Cloud Apps is in most of the M365 SKUs now, at least in discovery mode. So we can let that ingest network logs. We can see what people are accessing from a SaaS perspective, but we can also ingest a lot of different data points and understand exactly what's going on. So we can start to uncover that shadow IT. We can start to understand where potentially processes are falling outside of the standard governance procedure, and we can start to take action and remediation based on that. And then what we've also got in here is Power Platform governance. We know that it's a very powerful tool set. We know that it drives a lot of activity, and we know that there are people that are itching to get hands-on, automate their own processes, build apps to do things within the organization, which could be done in a much more efficient way. But putting the governance around that platform, making sure that you're not leaving yourselves liable to either data egress or operational risk based on the user that's created all of these applications, hands in their notice and leaves the organization, and suddenly you've got a lot of applications that don't work anymore. Understanding how to put some guardrails around those processes is really important from a security and compliance perspective. Looking at defining requirements and priorities, what we'd like to do is we'd like to understand what risk is already within an organization. So if we're looking across some of these pillars that we've just run through, some of the vital questions that we're asking ourselves is what data do people hold? How is it currently protected, and how does it need to be used? What access do people need to that data in order to do what they need to do? In order to understand risks around identity, we're looking at how users are actually accessing the systems and what protections are currently in place around them. Looking at signals within audit logs, at how people are getting in, looking at what policies are currently in place, and trying to review that just to make sure that people aren't being exposed to risk and can't be kind of compromised from that perspective. Devices is always an interesting concept because there's so many different ways and different products that are in place to manage devices, usually within an organization. So it's just about making sure that those updates are coming out efficiently. It's making sure that they're not installing applications which are introducing risk to those devices, that they're not using them in a way which would compromise the estate. And also making sure that they've got sufficient protection being deployed, and that the definitions for viruses and malware are being updated frequently, and that those are accessible to people. Talking about communication, and that could be from a concept of email, it could be from a concept of instant messaging, it could be even from telephony, but how are we filtering threats? How are we making sure that people aren't being spoofed? How are we making sure that social engineering isn't giving people away into those organizations? And how are we making our users aware of what their part of the responsibility is? How can they be active, alert, and aware of what these risks could be? Because technology can't solve all of those problems. And then from an applications perspective, are we ensuring that users aren't finding local solutions? What we often find is we find a security team with the best will in the world of putting restrictions into what people can do with the tool sets with absolute justification. And it makes a lot of sense. From an end user perspective, they're seeing that as a blocker in terms of trying to do what they do. So they'll find another solution. What we have to do with security and compliance is just be aware of the knock-on impact of what we're trying to achieve, and what the actual end user input is and the end user experience is around that, to make sure that we're not putting a blocker into operational aspects to protect security, because that will open up extra risk. So we're talking about how can we work with modern perimeter in terms of risk. So what used to be an on-premise estate, shown here in the yellow circle, where we could pretty much keep everything within our boundaries, in kind of the past few years has opened up massively in terms of solutions that are in play, locations that people are working from, devices that they're accessing things from, and all of these factors which are moving into an incredibly dispersed area. So we're looking at how can we make use of the tool sets we've got in order to enable all of that kind of flexibility and making it easier for people to work, but whilst keeping an element of control and not compromising on our security. So what we're looking at here is where could this be introducing new risk factors, and these are just very high level bits and pieces. It's not designed to be exhaustive by any stretch. But by understanding things across kind of the piece, we're looking at how can people be susceptible to malicious actors? How can their accounts potentially be compromised? But also, how are we interacting with external parties? How are we getting access to other people's estates, and how are we giving other people access to ours? We're looking at how we can share and transmit data outside of our perimeter. So if we see Microsoft 365 as our environment, are we giving people the ability to send links so that we're keeping that data within our control, or are we sending that out as an attachment on an email? Are we educating people on how best to share that data and how best to make sure that we're keeping control of it? And if we are allowing it to be sent out, are we protecting that with sensitivity labels? What could be the consequences of that data falling into the wrong hands? And are we taking appropriate measures based on the level of risk with those individual pieces of data? Some things are far more sensitive than others. If we were to send out, the payroll list to the wrong organisation, that would probably be quite a bad thing for the organisation. Whereas other pieces of data that go to the wrong hands are probably not so reputationally damaging. So we need to be aware of those things as well. We're looking at devices and how can the loss of the theft of the device cause us issues. What could malicious software do? And again, how could data leak off of those devices? And then when we're looking at collaborating, again, similar to the identity piece, how can we maintain access, but only for as long as it's required? So that the risk there is that we're leaving people access to team sites, SharePoint sites for longer than they need it to, and suddenly extra data is introduced to those sites which could be exposed to them. We're allowing access to the wrong resources, so there is a very real risk that people could share the wrong site with the wrong people, and are we taking action to prevent that? And then could a breach at a collaborator introduce a vector to you? So if you are working with somebody and their accounts get breached, does that expose you to any risk, and what actions can you take to protect yourself from that? So what we're looking to do in a more succinct way is enable modern working without increasing risk where possible. So we're looking at, from a conditional access and enhanced MFA perspective, we're looking at getting users to report suspicious activity. If they suddenly get an MFA alert on their authenticator app that they weren't expecting, are they doing anything about that? We're looking to disable what we now see as the more spoofable authentication methods. So one-time passcodes via SMS, via email. There's every likelihood that those things can be intercepted, and somebody could use those vectors in order to get access to an MFA account. We're looking, so if we disable those authentication methods, then that cuts off that vector. We're looking at that we want to choose where and how we want people to be able to access our requirements. So we could disable access from particular countries. We could only allow it from particular countries. We want to make sure that we're making those steps and we're making the right decisions to protect what we're doing. In terms of protecting our endpoints, we're looking to make sure that we can get access to updates. We're making sure that things are managed, vulnerabilities are remediated as soon as possible. And most of the time that means without having to access the corporate network via VPN. Anybody with an internet connection should be able to take advantage of those updates as soon as they are released. We're looking at managing our data as well. And I think we've covered that in a fair bit of detail. So I won't go too deep into that, but we're looking ultimately at preventing leakage and protecting our data wherever it resides. In terms of our existing investments and making sure that we're making the most of it, it's just a few steps that we're going to go through here, just to understand kind of what usage people have currently got in play. So which parts of the security and compliance stack have people deployed? For a lot of people, things like multi-factor authentication should be mature, should be adopted. There are other things like sensitivity labels or data loss prevention, which may not be quite at the same level. So understanding what you have got deployed, what you've got access to, and what would be of benefit to you is obviously useful when you're starting to analyze what you've currently got in the stack. Looking at how actively you monitor alerts and signals. So things that come into the Defender stack, things that come into dashboards, are we actually looking at those? How are we viewing our risks to our estate, or are we waiting for kind of a more reactive approach and understanding exactly what that's happening? Looking at how effectively users are using the solutions in place. So when we've got analytics available to show how these things have been deployed, are we monitoring those? Are we making sure that we're monitoring the adoption of those things, that we're seeing how effectively they are being used by users? Looking at sign-in logs, user risks, understanding where those things have come from and whether we need to tailor our policies to account for that. And then again, are we collecting or reporting analytics on things like sensitivity labels, DLP triggers, or are they going into an inbox somewhere that's being monitored and responded to that way? If we know the kind of the amount that these things are being triggered, if we know the metrics assigned to them, then we can take action and we can modify those things appropriately. Also, in making the most of our investment, ultimately, we're looking at kind of understanding what is in use of the estate. What are we paying for more than once? Sometimes it's absolutely right to pay for an extra solution. There's either a lack of confidence or a lack of functionality, or there's some reason to build an air gap between what's in the Microsoft toolset and what's there from another provider. And there is a justification. So the important thing is to understand if that's being put under constant review, if there's an appetite to move to a single solution, and how are those third-party products potentially compatible with monitoring solutions. So moving those things, looking at consolidating on the investment, looking at making sure that we're getting the most out of the investment in those Microsoft licenses, which particularly when we get up to the E5 kind of SKU is not insignificant in terms of the money being spent, just making sure that we're getting the most out of that. You can see from the image on the right just how many kind of, and you know, again, not exhaustive, but how many solutions could be in play in the security and compliance stack and how that can play in. Just making sure that from a perspective of investment and operations, that we're giving people the most effective use of that investment. We can look at how we're using telemetry and signals. So how are we kind of using the Defender portal as a starter? How are we responding to those incidents? How are we viewing that consolidated information and getting ourselves the best use of the tool set to get a view of what's going on across our estate? How are we taking action against those threats? Whose responsibility is it? Who is ultimately taking ownership of what's happening with these assets, and where we are seeing kind of high threat levels, who's responding to that? We also want to understand where education could be the answer. It's not always the case that we should be relying on the security teams or the IT teams for that matter to take care of all of these items. So we could be looking at how can we best use telemetry and signals to identify where people kind of need help, need education in order to minimize these threats for themselves. For wider requirements across the estate, we can also use Sentinel or other SIEMs to pick up those signals to kind of pull that all into one place where we can see exactly what's going on and start to then automate and orchestrate those responses, and then go down into root cause analysis and understand exactly what's causing the incidents that we're seeing across our estate. Just looking at planning for future threats. I'm aware we're running out of time, so I'm whizzing through some of this quite quickly. But in order to plan for future threats, we're kind of looking at education and understanding as being a core part of this. It's part of our teach, don't sell mantra. It's part of making sure that people are getting the knowledge they need to do their jobs. So from an education and understanding perspective, and also looking from an end user perspective, security and compliance measures can sometimes be seen as a blocker. And we don't want that. We want these things to be in there to protect our users. So ensuring that we can communicate why change is happening, if there's an extra step in a process, what the benefits of that are from an organizational perspective, but also how it protects that end user is critical. Understanding the problem, and helping people to understand the problem and what is trying to be solved is critical to ensuring that they adopt those solutions. So a lot of people said, well, we just don't want to use multi-factor authentication because it stops me logging in as quickly. But in understanding the amount of risks that takes away is helping to drive adoption in that sphere as a high level example. Already mentioned during the course of this presentation that if security is seen as inconvenient, people will find another way. So we've had a lot of people that have said, oh, I can't share this file via SharePoint. I can't share this via a link. So they'll attach it to an email and you've lost control of it. In worst cases, people are starting to find, personal uses of Dropbox or WeTransfer to share things out of organizations, and we're losing all control over that data once that's gone. So trying to make sure that the security is in place, but is also operational, means that we can run greater adoption. Enabling feedback loops so that we're not just deploying solutions and letting people get on with it, but they can feedback and allow those things to be tailored to fit. and also running simulations to understand vulnerabilities. It's one of the major pluses with Defender for Office 365 Plan 2 as opposed to Plan 1 is that you can run phishing attacks simulations and you can understand who would be susceptible to things like social engineering. You can understand who may be liable to giving their credentials to a very official looking phishing item, and then we can run education off the back of that to try and address those fears. We're looking at zero trust and how that fits in with Microsoft Defender. So we're always looking at how we can kind of assume breach and verify explicitly, and how we can use these tool sets to follow the kind of zero trust elements. So just some of the things which are available based in that tool set. So in Defender for Office 365, 0-hour auto purge. So even after something's in an inbox, we can still make sure that it doesn't get clicked if a threat is seen in there. Safe links, safe attachments, making sure that things are scanned in real time to understand the threats that could be in those links, in those attachments, in those things which are landing in users' inboxes. Defender for Endpoint, using things like behavior-based real-time protection to see things which shouldn't be happening on those devices and take action. Cloud-based protection to make sure that we're always up to date with the latest threats. And block at first sight. So where something is landing on a device and we're trying to open it, we can block it straight away. And then again, looking in Defender for Cloud Apps, we've already mentioned about discovery, uncovering shadow IT. We can also look at app policies, where people should be able to access things, where they shouldn't, and how we can monitor whether we're going to allow access to certain third-party applications and applying controls on that. So making sure that people have to multi-factor more frequently, making sure that people can't do certain things in certain parts of the tool set, just to ensure that we are providing the utmost level of protection that we can. In terms of monitoring and alerting, making sure that we are sending alerts when things are identified, making sure that we've at least put on our default security and compliance alerts, but also that they're not just going to an admin address which is unmonitored somewhere, making sure that the right people are receiving those. We can check compliance policies are actually sending alerts and sending them to the right person. So where we've got a DLP policy, again, it's making sure those are going out to who they need to go to. We can check service health for active issues. So sometimes the issues may be seen as things which are Microsoft centric, and it could be a problem with the service itself. And we get a lot of people reporting issues, so just making sure we're on top of those. And the last two kind of follow on from the last stage, communicating with users on how to protect themselves, making sure that we're often giving them advice or knowledge about active threats if they are within the estate. And running things like phishing simulations just to make sure that we know exactly where our susceptibilities are. If you haven't already got something along the lines of Sentinel or a SIEM, it might be something which you want to look at in the near future. So making sure that we're aware of what those things can do, how we can get a single view of our estate, how we can get signals from multiple platforms, products and devices. So even things like network logs from on-premise estates can be ingested and evaluated for risk just to see where things might be happening. And it just improves detection of threats and allows us to kind of orchestrate and remediate across the estate where possible. Also coming soon, security CoPilot. So providing that kind of AI flavor to analysing signals quicker at machine speed, understanding where things may have gone wrong and performing root cause analysis in an automated manner and allowing us to report on threats within the estate much quicker. And it's designed to work alongside staff, so it helps them to remediate issues and to improve their awareness and knowledge. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And then just looking at how you can roadmap the future. Obviously, we covered a fair few bits at a high level today, and you might want to go into more depth on some of those, and that's absolutely fine. But just understanding how to answer the questions, how to look ahead, how to look at realistic timescales for implementation, and how to get the most out of the tool set is something that we are more than happy to help with if you see value in that. So just to leave you, I'll just check up some of the Cloud Direct details. So if you do want to get in touch with us, multiple ways to do so, and feel free to reach out to any one of the team who can put you in touch with the right people.
Hi Pete, there's just two questions in the Q&A section.
So the first one is that PIM was not expected as a valid measure for Cyber Essentials certification. PIM on the standard user accounts is not seen as a valid measure, but we still encourage PIM on a secondary admin account, just so that you haven't got accounts which are, ultimately utilized less than a normal account, which are sat at risk with admin credentials left on them. So if you have got access to PIM, we still recommend using it, even though Cyber Essentials tells us to separate our standard accounts from our admin accounts. If we still put PIM on those admin accounts, then we are providing an extra level of protection from that functionality. And then the second is around removing a reliance on SCCM on premise. Yep. Okay, so that's getting information on Microsoft Connected Cache. So I think we'll take that one offline and see if we can get any information that's not on the published roadmap, but we can certainly ask those questions on your behalf. We haven't got any more information on that at the moment, but we can try and get that. So I don't believe there's anything else coming through, Kimberly.
No, that's all of them.
Excellent. So yeah, thank you again, everybody, for your time, and hope to speak to you soon.